Good evening, I'm Matt Kramer, President of the Catholic Foundation here in Dallas. We're pleased to host this webinar series about end-of-life issues from a Catholic perspective. You'll receive practical information and are encouraged to share it with your family and friends. Thanks to you for joining us, and to our speakers for offering their time and expertise. We've served many families and individuals in our 65-year history, so please contact us if we can be of assistance. We're easily reached at catholicfoundation.com and 972-661-9792 to schedule a conversation. Please enjoy tonight's session.
Good evening and welcome back to The Conversation, a Catholic perspective on end-of-life issues. My name is Michael George, Senior Development Officer here at the Catholic Foundation, and you are joining us for the last of our 4 sessions on The Conversation. And we are delighted to have 2 tremendous presenters tonight. We have a full agenda, but we will end at 8 o'clock. So why don't we go ahead and start as we normally do with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. O glorious Saint Christopher, you have inherited a beautiful name, Christ-bearer, as a result of the wonderful legend that while carrying people across a raging stream, you also carried the child Jesus. Teach us to be true Christ-bearers to those who do not know him. Protect all of us that travel both near and far, and petition Jesus to be with us always. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So, without further ado, I'm going to ask fellow Senior Development Officer Elizabeth Murray to introduce our guest speaker. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Michael. And it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker for the evening, Chris Taylor. Chris is the funeral director at Dignity Memorial Sparkman Group. He spent his entire 43-year career as a funeral director, learned his craft as an apprentice under Jerry Crane. A lifelong Catholic, the majority of his funeral services are in the faith community. This allows him to mentor other funeral directors on conducting Catholic services. Further, Chris serves on an elite national team that provides funeral services to numerous dignitaries. He and his wife, Kelly, attend St. Thomas Aquinas Catholic Church and are members of the North Central Sarah Club. Please join me in welcoming Chris Taylor. Chris?
Good evening. I'm glad to be here with you all. And obviously I've got a few agenda items to talk about, and let's start right now. So there are 9 things that we want to talk about. First of all, and foremost, you want to be informed about the options available. When I say be informed, you have an idea what you want, but I want you to gather some more information about that and actually write it down. That's the key thing with number 2 is record your wishes and write them down. Don't just put them in a lockbox, have them available. I've told the story before that I've made funeral arrangements with folks, and they come up a couple of weeks later and they said, hey, we got a chance to look in Dad's lockbox and we found such and such and so, and I've already taken care of the funeral. So the key thing is I want you to write it down and share it with someone that you care about and trust. That someone may be your wife or somebody in your family, but write it down and have it available. You want to talk about those that you want to talk about it with are probably in your family, and some are comfortable with talking about it and some aren't. You want to talk to the ones that are really comfortable and have the specifics that you talked about and written down in lines 2 and number 2 in with your family. Ultimately, you want to find out exactly where you're going to be buried. I have some folks that are buried in secular cemeteries like a Sparkman Hillcrest. I have some folks that are in Catholic cemeteries like a Calvary Hill Funeral Home. We need to define, you need to define specifically where you want to be buried and or if you decide on cremation, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, then you want to be specific about that. And some folks have a service and then they're cremated, and some folks want to be cremated and then they have their service, and we'll talk about that. The third thing that I've got on here is organ donation. The key thing is you want to have that information long before. Don't make it your final, your family's final wish to come up with an organ donation or will your body to science, because it's a multi-day task involving sometimes an attorney. And I know enough about that process to be somewhat dangerous about the process of organ donations, but you need to talk with someone that specifically can help you with the paperwork. The cremation piece, let's talk about that. Some folks want to be cremated and then they want the funeral to be held. Obviously, today's time of the pandemic, we have been aware of that, and I can tell you that we're going to have a lot of funerals when things return to normal, whatever normal is going to look like in the days and weeks to come. The key thing is that we all know exactly that piece, and we've got that cremation nailed down, and we know specific about that situation, but I want you to feel comfortable with it, because ultimately it's going to be you. If it's a cemetery space, we sometimes bury somebody in their cremated remains on a cemetery space, but you need to network with the funeral home and or the cemetery to find out the specifics about that. Here's a key thing for number 5. Don't be afraid to ask about prices. Some people ask me, how much does a funeral cost today? That's kind of like asking how much does a car cost today. You've got cars that are Mercedes and BMWs, et cetera, that are a little more expensive than the GM types of the cars. So you need to find out the specifics. Some people say, well, how much is the starting point for like a cremation? Anyone that spends less than, let's say, $4,000 or $5,000 for cremation, I'm a little bit concerned about, because I know what's out there, and you're going to spend more than that on just the basics of cremation. On a funeral service, it's not terribly unusual to spend north of $10,000 or $12,000 or $15,000 for a funeral service. The key thing is, once again, that you have the information and you're comfortable with that information and making the decision that you're making. Number 6 is consider planning or prepaying for the funeral arrangement. That is a piece that some people are making and doing, and I can assist you with that. The key thing is that, once again, that you've asked all the questions. Some people are of the mindset that they're going to make pre-arrangements and get it all over with and said and done, and they're going to put it in their drawer, but they're going to keep a person in the loop as to exactly what they prepaid and what's available. Sometimes it's only in the cemetery, sometimes it's the cemetery and the funeral. I'm 65 years old, so to say that I know something about Medicaid and Medicare would be an understatement. I know a lot about that, but with the pre-arrangement service and Medicaid, you want to, again, be sure to ask the questions and have the answers that you want and that you're specific to your situation. National Cemetery, for example. There is DFW National Cemetery, which is our local cemetery, and there's other cemeteries in other major towns. One of the ones that's often referred to is Arlington National Cemetery in DC, because I can tell you that I have buried there before, but it takes multi-weeks to even get a reservation in there. I can also tell you that at DFW of late, because it's so popular, that it's sometimes 1 or 2 weeks before we even get in there. And so when a family wants to have a funeral service at a St. Rita or a St. Thomas or someplace like that, we'll go ahead and have that. and hold the casket until the time when everyone gathers together and we have the service at the National Cemetery. That is one of the benefits for veterans that applies many times. I jokingly, but it's the truth, say that when a funeral is held in the National Cemetery, there's two things that I know that the government does really, really well. They take our money on April 15th every year, and they bury our veterans with a lot of honor, and those cemeteries are well taken care of. So we can do that. We can make that happen. The key thing in the form that you'll have is the DD 214, D as in David, D as in David 214. That tells you everything that you want to know about a veteran. Here's a good key thing: speak to the parish first and then the funeral home. And the reason that that is a point is that you as a family want to know specifically what a parish is doing before we come to the funeral home, before you come to the funeral home. Sometimes some people show up and then we have to call the parish, which is not at all unruly or difficult. It's just that first the family has to be informed exactly what's going to happen at a parish, or a priest that's involved. Then we're involved, so it all kind of comes together. Questions and answers are the next topic, and someone's going to filter those specific questions. Or what are they?
Okay, Chris. We do have quite a few questions this evening. First of all, with the pandemic, how are most people handling their arrangements?
That's a good question. I had a funeral for a friend of mine, and he passed away, and he was a very, very popular attorney. And under normal circumstances, that church would have been full, if not even fuller than full, but there were only 125 people there. And the reason is because it was live streamed. That's one of the really, really good things that's coming out of this whole pandemic is sometimes when I made funeral arrangements prior to this pandemic, I would have people say to me, hey, Uncle Harry's up in Schenectady and he's not going to come down. Could we send him some extra worship aids and we'll do a few extra prayer cards for him? And I would say yes. But now I say yes, but have him tune in and watch the funeral, and especially the homily live. So that's one of the things that has come out of this that's really positive for funeral directors and funeral homes, is that we're live streaming a lot of these funerals. So the pandemic has changed the method that we're doing some things, yes, but that's one of the positive things with it.
And is that a trend you see continuing after things potentially go back to normal?
On and on it goes. Yes, I see that we're going to be live streaming, just like some folks, we're eliminating, I think, some offices. And the reason is because they find that people are more efficient and effective at home because they can be. And so, yes, we're going to keep live streaming next week, next month, next year, 10 years from now.
Great. Okay. Another question we have is, how long does it take for a body to be cremated?
That's a pretty good question. The process under normal circumstances, and normal is pre-pandemic, it would be 7 to 10 days for us to get all the permits. The key thing is that funeral homes can't just take someone from the bedside and go directly to the crematory and have the cremation. We have to go through a multi-phase process. The death certificate has to be signed by the physician. Then we have to get permission from the medical examiner. Then we have to get an authorization from the state of Texas. I can tell you that process from 7 to 10 days has moved to more like 10 to 15, 20 days. And it's not unusual. And I've had situations where some families end up waiting a while, to the point that when we have a service, it's a memorial service or memorial mass, but then we're going to have a big gathering at some point when everyone is able to get together.
Mm-hmm. Well, that actually leads me into my next question. Can you kind of explain the difference between a funeral mass and a memorial mass?
A memorial mass is a little bit different than a funeral mass in that the priest and the liturgy is a little bit different. As Catholics, we experience a little bit different taste of exactly what's going to happen with a memorial mass versus a funeral mass. Now, the key thing is that a funeral mass can occur with an urn present or a casket present.
Mm-hmm.
The key thing is that something or some portion of the funeral is a funeral mass as opposed to a memorial mass. Sometimes we have memorial masses. But one of the key things for us Catholics is prayer cards. If a family has a remote inkling that someone had a preferred saint or a preferred prayer, we can, because of the nature of the beast, that I can get a printer to put a specific prayer on a prayer card. I do that for a lot of folks and make that happen. So the key thing is write it down. If you have a devotion to St. Thomas Aquinas and you like a certain prayer that's not the St. Thomas Aquinas prayer, it's like the Hail Mary, then write that down. The key thing is that someone else knows that besides you, because you're not going to be around to tell them.
Mm-hmm. So don't just write it all down, leave it in a drawer, and nobody knows where it is.
Exactly.
Okay. If you have a body at the funeral, yet the deceased wishes to be cremated, is that body normally embalmed?
Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. Sometimes some folks don't want to be embalmed, and sometimes the family doesn't want them embalmed, and sometimes the family does. Sometimes the family wants to have a viewing, and we'll have a time where they'll view, or the casket, the person is present and the casket is closed. It's just a matter of what, there's two things that we need to take care of. We need to make sure that the family is pleased and that the clergy and or church is pleased. If everyone's happy, then the funeral director is happy.
Okay. So there's really no precedent in that regard.
There isn't, back in the day, the older days, everyone was embalmed and everyone had a funeral. Nowadays, we're a little more modern and we have twists and turns, and we try to accommodate that. And sometimes some families aren't on the same page, but we try to get them on the same page before we have the funeral.
Okay. And along those lines, how long can you hold on to a body if it's not embalmed? Given the delays of COVID and all the things that we have going on in today's world.
Another good question. I've had a situation even before the COVID thing broke out where someone was well overseas and it took him several days, if not weeks, to get back. And so we, as a funeral home, held the body in refrigeration. There was to be no embalming. So we held the body in refrigeration until the time that we had the funeral. Then the person was placed in the casket, and then the funeral was held, the traditional funeral, weeks later. And his son, who was overseas, got back for that, and it was all difficult, but it was all good.
Mm-hmm. In regard to, as you're making plans and the obituary, how is the obituary handled? Is it handled by you? Is it handled by the family? How does it get printed? What are the details regarding all of that?
I am blessed with having a sister in my family, and she writes all of the obituaries for all of our family. And the reason is she's good with the King's English, in that she has a degree in English and she knows the specific words. The key thing is that a family, someone that knows the life that was lived, and sometimes that someone is the actual person that is going to die, if they'll write that down, that they were involved with the Catholic Foundation or the Catholic Charities or whatever. I want them to write it all down so that someone eventually can pick that piece up and write the obituary. One of the key things with an obituary is to make sure that one of the final things that's said is donations may be made too. And what that donation link does is, back in the day, everyone would have their checkbook and read the paper. Well, nowadays, instead of a checkbook, they're clicking on a link. And so that's what we try to impress upon a family and to have is a link in an obituary so that they can click on the link and make a donation.
Right. And is an obituary a necessary thing to do?
There's two versions of the obituary. It's a good question. There's the version that's going to be in the paper that some people read, and there's the version that's going to be online. And the version that's going to be online, it doesn't matter if it's 10 words or 10,000 words. It's going to cost the same. The key thing is that it's readable, and that, you know, if there's some humor in it, that it's appropriate humor. But the version, two versions, there's the version that's in the paper and there's the version that's in the computer or it's online.
Okay. Back to cremation. Is it a reasonable assumption to assume in the area of $4,000 to $5,000 for a very simple cremation with the ashes being returned to the family?
The number that I gave you is just a direct cremation. If a family wants us involved in the funeral and having the funeral at a church, obviously it's more than $4,000 or $5,000. It's more like $7,000 or $10,000. And here's a key thing: the diocese has in churches some columbariums, and the cemeteries have columbariums as well. There aren't a lot of columbariums at churches, but I know specifically there's 5. St. Thomas does not have it, but St. Joseph does. St. Jude's, St. Elizabeth Seton in Allen, Mary Immaculate, and I think St. Mark's in Plano, St. Elizabeth Seton, I've already said that. Those are the 5 columbariums. And when I say columbarium, that's the building that cremated remains are held in. Ones at cemeteries are usually in mausoleums, which is where full-size bodies and caskets go.
Got it. Okay. And then our final question is, in regard to COVID, are there any special protocols for the deceased who has COVID that you guys have to follow?
Good question. I don't like dropping names, but I had recently had the funeral for Deacon Carl Thielen, and he died, unfortunately, with the COVID disease, but his family wanted to see him. So obviously, Deacon Carl was embalmed, and then there was a shield put up on the casket. It's a clear shield, and so they were able to view. So that the casket was closed at the cemetery or at the funeral at St. Paul the Apostle Church in Richardson, but we had the casket open for the family to see, but we had a shield up, and it's a safe shield, but it's the nature of the beast of what we have today with the whole pandemic thing that's working right now. We do have a shield.
And then one final question. You had talked about perhaps prepaying your arrangements and getting all of that settled. Does that lock the cost in, and is that beneficial for the families to do in advance?
It does lock the cost in. So if you're paying for it now, whatever the charge is today, whatever the charge is 10 years from now, you're paying because you've already taken care of it. And so, yes, it's just like a policy where you're purchasing at today's prices and nothing else goes up. Now there's cash advances, death certificates and obituaries and those kinds of things that are separate from that, but we make the family aware of all that.
Okay. And actually I had one last question sneak in. Are there any, from you or others in your business, do you do any kind of pro bono for the homeless or other cases where people can't afford a funeral?
Yes. We work with Catholic charities, and we've had situations where people have died and there is no funds. And so we've had priests that have donated their time, obviously, and we donate and either a funeral or cremation. But the key thing is call me and ask me. If you want to call me through Sparkman Hillcrest, a lot of times 214-363-5401 is the number of Sparkman Hillcrest. But any of the Dignity Memorial locations will know Chris Taylor. It's Calvary Hill, Sparkman Richardson, Sparkman Crane, Sparkman Hillcrest, etc. The Dignity Memorial is a brand name that we use, but we cover all of the, we manage all the cemeteries for the diocese, but we cover everything.
Okay, that's great. Well, Chris, thank you. We appreciate your presentation this evening. Thank you very much.
You bet.
And tonight, our second speaker is Cheryl Unis Mansour. Cheryl is my colleague and the Vice President for Development at the Catholic Foundation. She's currently in her 16th year with the foundation, and she has the overall responsibility for all development and marketing activities. Prior to coming to the foundation, Cheryl served as the Vice President for External Affairs for Communities Foundation of Texas for 14 years. At CFT, she was responsible for the foundation's relationships with clients, media, regional, and national philanthropic entities. Cheryl holds memberships with Dallas Estate Planning Council, the Estate Planning Council of North Texas, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and the Partnership for Philanthropical Planning. Cheryl is also a member of the Conference of the Southwest Foundation. Please join me in welcoming Cheryl Mansour. Cheryl?
There we go. It's a pleasure to be here this evening, and I'm delighted to be able to speak on my favorite subject. As you can probably tell from all the years that I've been doing this, that I've spent a lot of time with it. And this evening, what I'd like to do is to share with you not only some of the ideas about charitable planning, but some stories to give you some ideas of what other people have done and have created their charitable legacies. And what is a legacy? I had a friend of mine ask me, what is the definition of a legacy? And a legacy is something that you leave behind, a gift or property. It's from people that have died, leave something behind. And that's what a legacy is. And you've probably received flyers in the mail from your university, from your church, from other organizations that you've donated to over the years about leaving a legacy. And another buzzword for besides leave a legacy is, what about planned giving? So I want to talk about planned giving as well. And planned giving is a significant contribution to charities, and but it's something that you plan for. It's what Ellen Dorn explained in the program last time, was about being sure to speak to a professional advisor, because a professional advisor can help you with your estate plan. And a lot of times they can help identify an asset that would be more tax efficient to put into your estate plan. So a planned gift can be made during your lifetime or when you pass away. And it's part of a financial and estate plan as a planned gift. I'd like to tell you about a planned gift that the foundation received years ago from Monsignor John Golshinsky, who was the pastor at St. Thomas Aquinas for 37 years. Monsignor John actually baptized me and ran the church and the school for many years. But he was passionate about serving the elderly in our Catholic community. So he had, in his will, he created a trust and a fund through his will that he named after his parents. And the purpose of that fund was to provide funding for maintenance or building of Catholic nursing homes over time, and the St. Joseph's residence in Oak Cliff has been a beneficiary of that fund for a long time, and it has we've granted out from the foundation $1.86 million from that fund to St. Joseph's residents. And before it became a for-profit institution, also St. Joseph's Village in Coppell received funding from this fund as well and built a chapel that is named after Monsignor John. So because he was so forward thinking, that was something that he planned for and something that he felt very passionate about. So that is just one idea. And the idea being that if you want to create something that's going to live on after you're gone, you can do that, and you can use a will to create something like that. Why should you plan for a gift? It's going to fulfill your passion for charitable giving. It's going to support the charities that you've supported during your lifetime, and it'll establish your legacy. And it'll help. It's like Father LeBone said to a group of people one time. They said, he said, who's going to take your place when you're gone? Who's going to be able to fill that part of the money that you've given during your lifetime? And you're gone, you won't be there anymore to do that. So you can, there is a way that you can continue to remember your favorite charities. Another longtime parishioner of St. Thomas was Joanne Wassoff Smith. And Joanne was an author. She wrote several different books. She was a teacher. She wrote the history of St. Thomas Aquinas when St. Thomas had their 50th anniversary. She was a real special person. And another little tidbit is she taught me in 5th grade. So St. Thomas was real near and dear to her heart, and her grandchildren went to Bishop Lynch High School. So she wanted to create an endowed scholarship fund that would provide a 4-year scholarship for a student graduating from St. Thomas from the 8th grade that would be attending Bishop Lynch. So she did that actually during her lifetime, and she lived long enough to see the first recipient of that scholarship, who actually just graduated last year, and that scholarship's been awarded again. But when she created that fund, the Catholic Foundation administers that fund, and the foundation also appoints the selection committee to choose the scholarship recipient. All of that being said is that you can create a fund, especially a scholarship fund, to do what you would like to see it do. You can name the criteria, the eligibility requirements. You can design it to be what you want to see it be. So that is just another planned gift, if you will. What to give? On the slide here, you'll see a laundry list of things that of assets that you can give to when you're establishing a fund now or establishing something through your will. One of the 2 best things out of this whole group of things is your IRA. If you leave your IRA to charity, then you're not double taxed on it, because a charity does not pay tax on, doesn't pay estate taxes or income taxes, so that your heirs, if they inherited the IRA, they would have to pay tax on it when they cashed it out or got money from the IRA. So that way you're not taxed twice if you give an IRA to charity. And insurance policies as well is a good gift to consider, because usually you buy it at a lower value than what happens when it's cashed out. So that might be something that you might want to think about as well. And another thing I want to bring to your attention is don't rule out intellectual property or closely held stock and partnership interests, because this day and time, a lot of individuals and families hold closely held stock and have intellectual property that can be valuable when royalties are paid or things like that. So if you have that in your portfolio or in your list of assets, think about that. And a professional advisor would be able to advise you on whether or not that would be advantageous to you and in your planning. When to give, when and how to give is something that there's several different ways you can do it. You can give cash or assets to charity now while you're living currently, or you can use what we at the Catholic Foundation see a lot of people using are donor advised funds. Donor advised fund is a wonderful charitable giving tool, and it's very flexible, and a lot of people like to use those while they're living, but it can also be advantageous to use when you pass away, because you can take that fund and create an endowment from the money that's left in it or money that's added to it when you die. And that endowment would continue to give after you're gone to the things that you're interested in giving to. And while you're living, think of it as a charitable checking account, because a lot of people put money in it and then they retain the right to recommend grants out of it during their lifetime. So they'll put money in, they'll recommend grants, and the money goes to their favorite charities. Then they'll reload it. So it's a wonderful tool. So do ask your professional advisor about a donor advised fund, or you can call one of us at the Catholic Foundation and we'd be glad to explain it to you. Later is charitable gifts that you list in your will. Out and out gifts that you want in your will to different specific charities that you want to see be the recipient of your assets after you're gone. The power of endowment, I strongly and highly recommend and would like for you to think about that. There's a lot of different examples of endowments, and I will tell you more about some of those as we go on. The now and later gift, if you will, are split interest gifts. And by split interest gifts, I mean that the donor can realize income during their lifetime, and then when they pass away, what's left in the trust goes to charity. And there's there's charitable remainder trust, charitable lead trust, and charitable gift annuities. Again, your professional advisor would be able to explain that to you, or we could do that as well. When I was talking about another endowment, I'd like to tell you about Edwin Wilkins. And for those people who attend St. Monica, you would probably remember Edwin, because Edwin was at Mass every day. He put the books out. He put the hosts out. He was there to support the church for so many years. And Edwin's family had the Wilkins Trunk Company downtown, for those of you who might remember that. His parents started it, and he and his brother. Well, Edwin had no heirs, so he left his whole estate to the Catholic Foundation. He created a scholarship fund, though, at Holy Trinity and Seminary, and then the bulk of the estate went to the Catholic Foundation to administer and to manage. And the income from that estate goes to St. Monica. every year, St. Monica gets an income stream from that fund. And that's what Edwin wanted to do. He wanted to support the church he loved. So again, that's a way to have, excuse me, an endowment that's going to continue to give to a charity that means a lot to you. Excuse me. So Edwin will always be remembered for his particular gift. A donor advised fund, you can get a donor advised fund at a an institutional fund from like Fidelity or Schwab, or what I call 1-800-philanthropy, because you're really not dealing with people like you would be at a community foundation. And a community foundation is a foundation that is a public charity. It's classified by the Internal Revenue Service as a public charity, and it is a consortium of many donor advised designated funds, trust, and created by a lot of different people. It is governed by a diverse board of trustees, and that's what makes the community foundation a public charity. And a public charity enjoys a greater income tax advantage than a private foundation. So if someone's thinking of doing a private foundation, I encourage them to look at the tax advantages of putting money into a public charity, such as the Catholic Foundation or the other faith-based foundations and community foundations here in our area. But a donor advised fund at a community foundation, like I said earlier, is a very flexible tool. And a lot of people have more than one charitable interest. And if you have a donor advised fund, you can remember several different charities through this fund and not just have to focus on one charity at a time. So if you create this fund and say you put a provision in there for when you pass away, the fund becomes permanent, and you can list the areas of interest, such as the elderly or education or things like that, or you can list a list of charities that you want remembered that would get an annual gift from that fund every year. And you would be remembered. And I like to advise people that a charity would much rather have an annual income stream than they would one lump sum, because they're going to spend it more wisely if they know it's going to come every year. They can budget for it rather than inherit one great big windfall that they probably won't use as wisely as probably they would if they could count on that income every year. So if you came to the Catholic Foundation and you created this fund, then in your will, you can make sure that any charitable gifts are designated that goes to the Catholic Foundation, because that's the tax exempt entity designated for your particular fund. If I was doing it, I'd be the Cheryl and George Mansour Fund of the Catholic Foundation. That's where the money would go to. And so what's the benefit of that? Well, it makes your current giving easier and more tax-wise, because you write one check to this fund and you get one piece of paper giving you a tax substantiation, so you don't have to keep up with a lot of receipts from a lot of different charities, because you have that one receipt. And then you retain the right to advise as to what charities you want to see that money go to. So the one tax receipt, anytime you put the gift in, you get that tax receipt, but the money may go out to 10, 15, 20 different charities. And if you change your mind on the charitable beneficiaries, you just simply work with us to change the beneficiary page of the fund agreement that controls the donor advised fund, and that way you don't have to go redo your will all the time. And we've done that quite a bit. It's just changed that one page. And an example of that is a dear lady that lived in Wiley, Texas, all her life. And she lived across the street from St. Anthony Church. And her husband actually was Methodist. And she was involved in a lot of civic things in Wiley. In fact, there's a school named after her in Wiley. And she supported a lot of Catholic causes there. In fact, she left her house to St. Anthony's for a rectory because it was directly across the street from her house, St. Anthony's was. But she established a permanent fund at the Catholic Foundation, and it was funded through her will after her death. And she named specific organizations that would get money every year. It was a laundry list of organizations, Catholic and non-Catholic. And so before she died, she would change those charities every once in a while. So all we had to do was change that sheet of beneficiaries that she wanted to remember. But she's a lovely, lovely lady and did a lot of good. So the next question would be, you ask yourself, well, how much would you give? How much should I give? How much should I remember to give through my will or my estate? And a lot of people do the normal biblical tithe of 10%. If you wanted to endow your current giving, there is a formula that some people use is if your annual giving is $10,000 and you need to create a $200,000 endowment with a 5% spending policy, and that would allow for the same level of giving that you're giving now. It would go into an endowment, and a lot of charities, a lot of foundations and universities and hospitals use a spending policy, which helps protect the value of the fund. And then some people treat their estate as another child. If you had 3 children, then they would make arrangements for there to be like 4 children, so that 4th child would be the charity. So that would go into, that's where the money would go. That's how you would divide your estate up. So that's always there. We have quite a few people that do that. But there's another fund, and this lady was Rita Smith knew Louise Buer, and so she saw what Louise Buer did at the Catholic Foundation. And Louise was a 5th generation Swiss immigrant and attended Ursuline Academy. And Louise, she was a parishioner at St. Bernard's, and she was single and had no children. So she established a charitable remainder trust with the Catholic Foundation in 1992 with $777,000 in stocks and property. And a charitable remainder trust is a trust that will pay you an income for your lifetime. And after you pass away, what's left in this trust will go to charity. So during her lifetime, Louise received $360,000 from this trust during her lifetime, and she passed away in 2000. At her death, it established a permanent endowment, and with assets worth $4.5 million. And since then, over $2.5 million has been granted out to charity, and the Louise Buer Fund now is worth $9.5 million. So that is really a phenomenal story. And again, I stress the power of endowment, of what it can do. So what are the next steps? Contact a professional advisor. because they can help you decide what assets are more advantageous for you to use in your estate planning. Do inventory your assets and plan how you want to distribute those assets and personal belongings. It will make a big difference. It will also make you feel better, and share this with your children, because in my experience, if children know that you have remembered charity in the will, then it will go over better than them getting upset because you left it to charity and didn't leave it to them. So if you have a discussion with your children beforehand and you set an example for them, it makes a tremendous difference in what they can anticipate, and they'll be very proud of you for it. So if I stop, I know I could rattle on all for a long time as I tell my colleagues on my soapbox, but I'll stop right here and see if there's any questions that I might be able to answer for you. And there's a lot of charitable giving options out there and a lot of charitable giving tools that are available to you. So do check into what might work best for you and your family.
Cheryl, thanks. That was a lot of great information for everybody. And we do have a couple of questions. You talked about the IRA and the benefits of donating the IRA. Does that also apply to a Roth IRA?
Yes, it does. And of course, now that with the Secure Act, if a child inherited an IRA, they have to cash it out within 10 years, I believe is the time frame. So gifting the IRA to charity is very advantageous, and it applies to both.
Okay. In setting up a donor advised fund, what's the smallest amount someone can donate to set up that fund? And as a follow-on, do they have to maintain a specific balance on an annual basis within that fund?
Well, I can speak to the Catholic Foundation. All foundations are different, and all commercial gift funds are different too, as to what their minimums are. But the minimum for the Catholic Foundation is $10,000 to open the fund. And no, you don't have to keep a particular balance in there. So we have quite a few funds that start with 10,000, and people recommend grants out of it, and they'll spend it all the way down. And then maybe reload it or maybe not. It just depends on the different individuals. But all commercial gift funds and community foundations are different. So I would advise you to check into it to see what is the minimum amount.
Okay. And then touching on insurance gifts, what types of insurance gifts does the Catholic Foundation accept and typically see?
Well, usually it'd be a life insurance policy. And what a person would do was to make the Catholic Foundation the owner and the beneficiary of the policy. Now, if the policy's paid up, that's great. But if it's not, a donor can make a gift of the premium amount to the Catholic Foundation, and we would pay the premium on it. And the money that you give us to pay the premium is a donation, so it would be tax deductible. There's a lot of that's the basic one, but there are different insurance scenarios that people can look into. It would be something to explore. We could explore different avenues, but mostly That's the type of insurance policies we get, or life insurance policies where the foundation is the owner and the beneficiary of the policy.
Okay. In regard to giving and giving trends and COVID, is the foundation seeing anything specific in the types of giving the donors are doing and giving that we're seeing, since COVID started to today?
Well, actually, you wouldn't think this would be true, but we have seen, this is our second biggest year of contributions in the foundation's history, has been this past year. And people have been very generous. They've not only given money and stocks, but we have seen businesses sell. So we've gotten parts of businesses that have been sold, and the foundation has benefited from that. Several people gave closely held stock, which we were able to participate in the sale of the closely held stock, and that went into contributions for the foundation. And a lot of people have a donor advised fund that this money that from the sale of the business would go into their donor advised fund. Mm-hmm. So that's why I encourage you, don't overlook closely held stock and intellectual property, because that's a very valuable asset. And we've seen people use it quite a bit this past year. And if you're selling a business and you want to donate some of that, be sure and call us before you sell the business. Call us before you even go into negotiations to sell a business. Don't sign anything, but come to us and tell us that's what you want to do, because at that point, then we would be able to participate, and it can't be a prearranged sale. It has to be something that we would get that part of the business, and it would be gifted to the foundation, and the foundation would sell it, and the money would go into a fund. So if you would like to visit about that as well, don't hesitate to give us a call, and we can explore those possibilities. There's never an obligation to look into any of these avenues. So having a discussion or a conversation, if you will, is always helpful.
Okay. And finally, regarding discussing philanthropy with your family, is that something the foundation can assist, families with, having those conversations?
Well, we could assist in advising what is the best way to set that up. And sometimes we do participate in a family discussion when we're asked to. We'd be happy to explain things to the family of what they're trying to accomplish and visit about that.
Great. Okay, that wraps up our questions for this evening, Cheryl. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Cheryl, thank you so much for the information that you gave us tonight and the wonderful stories. The donor stories were what really resonated with me for sure. So thanks for your expertise this evening.
Thank you.
And to our viewers who have been part of this conversation for the last 10 days, well, we've reached the end of the line. Over the last 10 days, we have covered a number of topics: pastoral care of the sick and dying. We've covered legal considerations, Catholic bioethics and the principles of those bioethics, and tonight's program on practical cemetery and funeral planning and charitable legacy planning. So we tried to cover the waterfront and give you some good information, and we hope that you have found it very useful for you and certainly for your family. Also, just to let you know, there's more help coming on the way, because we're going to be sending you an email where you can get more materials and do a deeper dive on any one of these topics. And of course, we have a slide up that you can see any one of our presenters over the course of the last 10 days. We'll be happy to talk to you and answer specific questions that might be appropriate for you and your family. As we wrap up, we have just a few thanks. We had a great team here at the foundation. Again, Bill Kula, our Director of Marketing and Communications, Elizabeth Murray, who you saw this evening quite a bit. In addition, one person that you didn't see, and that's Amy DeLeese, who is our Senior Administrative Assistant. And she's the person who really was in charge of making sure that things ran smoothly along the way. And just like always, we couldn't do this without you. So we really do appreciate your time and the investment that you have made in the conversation. So it's going to get a little bit cold in Texas tonight, and over the weekend. So please stay safe, and we hope to see you again somewhere down the road. So for the conversation, we stand adjourned. God bless.